Hey, good morning everyone, it's Tractor Man 44 here. Got a 1945 International H that in going through the routine service to get this thing on the road, I found out I've got a couple of leaking seals in the front of the rear of the transmission housing, which is right here. This is the leading edge of the transmission housing here. This is the end of the engine assembly in the frame right here. This will be the portion that contains the ring gear and all that stuff, the starter drive, and also the clutch. This will be what disengages and engages the clutch. This is going to be the hydraulic from the belly pump. The hydraulic fittings, there's still another one on the other side. This is going to be what I'm going to call the torque tube. And then this is the leading edge of the transmission final drive housing. The transmission is right here in the immediate forefront. Then the final drive is actually where the pinion and the bull gears go to the rear axles. But right here, I've got a shaft that comes up to turn the belly pump, that anytime the engine's turning, anytime the crankshaft's rotating, the series of gears in here is also rotating the gears on that pump. But they're freewheeling until you put the hydraulic pump in the gear with this lever up here under the dash. When you put that in gear, then it begins, creating the hydraulic pressure. But the seal on that shaft that's leaving the transmission housing, entering the torque tube, is leaking. At the same time, directly above it, you have a input shaft to the transmission that is connected via the clutch directly to the crankshaft of the engine. That seal right there is also leaking. So I've got a pair of seals, one on top of each other, in the leading portion of this that I'm going to have to gain access to in order to change out. Massey Harris's I don't have a problem with, but this will be the first time I've gotten into these. So there's a series of things that's going to happen. I got to take my temporary fuel tank off. I've got to disconnect the steering knuckles and all that. Disconnect, remove the battery, take off the electric and all that kind of stuff. May even have to remove the starting housing, may even have to remove the power takeoff belt pulley assembly, I don't know. For now, we're just going to go ahead and start stripping the battery, disconnect electric, set the temporary fuel tank off. Fortunately, I don't have the serviced fuel tank and the hood back on yet. This problem came to light before I got to that point. Okay, now I got the mounting studs or mounting bolts out of there. This is not going to want to budge. This has been in place since 1945. This gasket is sealed tremendously. If you notice here, when you split the tractor, you only see a bolt here and one on the opposing side, which is why this has to come off, is to gain access to that bolt on the front of that transmission housing over there. You don't see any more bolts anywhere, but when you remove the inspection pan off of the bottom of where the coupling is that connects the drive shaft to your input shaft, or crankshaft to the input shaft of the transmission, and also connects up the hydraulic belly pump, you'll see that there's a pair of studs that come in from here with no nuts on it. Okay, after a little working back and forth, these came out of the hole here. They're nothing more than alignment pins. For whatever reason, they have they're threaded on the outside, but it's definitely just an alignment pin that just goes down and makes sure everything is perfectly in alignment. So once those are out there, and we've got the 4 mounting bolts down here, we've got a couple of more 5/6, 5/8 here that go all the way through. See the length of those go all the way through and attach the center part of this to the transmission housing. So that should be ready to pop loose. So I'm going to go to the other side and see if I can break that loose and lift that off of there. I should have removed all the wires first. I'm going to give you all a point to ponder. You see all that water trailing right there underneath the rear end of the tractor? That's a good pint or pint and a half of water that came out of this when I pulled it out. Now this tractor's been inside the shed now since last fall, so that means that water has gotten in there somehow over the course of the last number of years sitting outside. This is going to have a total thorough cleanup before it goes back in. Normally what I do whenever I split a tractor is I go out to the overhead hoist. I've got chain falls and everything that allow me to lift up the front end and the back end separately, and then roll them forward and backwards and everything, maintain whatever level that I want. But the weather is too iffy right now this time of year, so what I'm going to do, I'm opting to borrow this from my much older brother, and I'm going to go ahead and rig this up right here, to where this is going to support the entire front end and the torque tube as I pull it forward, and we'll let the blocks of wood and everything support the actual transmission and final drive. So what we got to do is we'll have to center this up somewhat. Now bear in mind, if you build you something like this to support the front end of your tractor, the key on this is stability. If you notice, you can see how wide the legs go out here, all the way out to the outside edge. They go out close to 3 foot beyond the outside edge of the tractor. And there's a reason for that, simply because you're working on this thing rocking back and forth, and if you have just a narrow support stand here in the middle, this whole thing can topple over, especially on a narrow front end style tractor. So you want to make this as wide and as stable as possible. Once you get this all set up, these Internationals are neat because they got all those holes and stuff in there, but you just you don't necessarily have to center it up, but just stack washers in there, kind of take up the slop and everything. We'll do the same thing to the other side. Bear in mind also, on this style of a front end support, if you only put one bolt in through your frame, whether it's an International or any other brand, just one bolt is not going to keep it from, if you push forward on the machine, it can pivot right here and just fall right straight to the ground, and then your torque tube or the back end of your engine clutch assembly can end up on the ground. So you always want to have at least 2 bolts in there to make sure that it doesn't want to walk on you. My brother and I make almost everything that we make is off of construction debris, just things that come off a job site. It's just a scrap piece of little 4-inch I-beam. I actually got a butt weld together in the middle, old piece of gas pipe, piece of rebar, whatever, and a piece of angle iron. And then these here are discarded scaffolding legs right here. They're bent or whatever. You have to warm them up and take the bend out of them and everything. But the cool thing about the scaffolding legs is once you build it like this right here, you can just adjust this guy right here to whatever you need to do to level your tractor up, to level up the bracket to align with anything that you're going to align with. Now right now, when you got the weight on it, you're going to have to either use a hammer and beat this around, or you'll use a long pipe. Once you get it installed in the position that the tractor is setting normally, you don't have to worry about moving this again, because you want that to maintain the same plane or the same level whenever you're going to reassemble the clutch shaft or the drive shaft into the input portion of the transmission. With the power takeoff removed and these 2 top assembly bolts loosened, we're now ready to go inside the torque tube housing to remove those 4 bolts that are up inside there. What you're looking at right here, that's the belly pump drive coming out of the transmission, and over here on the other side is the belly pump drive going into the obvious belly pump. Directly above it is the connector from the crankshaft of the tractor to the input shaft of the transmission. And on the far side over there, you can see the 2 7/8-inch nuts, and sticking right out in between the 2 7/8-inch studs is the pin, the alignment pin. Now there's another set of those directly over here on this side. There they are there. Now this is a very tight and confined area, very difficult to get to, but once I get those cracked loose, they should spin out fairly easily. You have to leave the top bolts of the transmission in until you get these guys fully removed, for safety reasons, obviously. Obviously, you can tell we've got the tractor split in half. Normally, like I said, we usually have these on the overhead hoist where we have chain falls that allows us to support the 2 sections and then roll one forward or the other backwards. Typically, I'll roll the back end backwards because it's supported by a choker and by a chain fall on front, and I've got the leverage of the rear wheels in order to rock and roll it to the rear, and leave the front portion of the tractor attached via a chain fall or a coffing hoist to another immovable object so that the front end doesn't roll backwards with me. But then what I'll do is easily adjust the tension on it by the coffing hoist that's hooked to the truck, and just slowly put pressure on it and watch it slowly separate. I was fortunate enough to have my son over here, so what we did on this one, being it's inside the shed and on the concrete, is I took a piece of pipe and cut a piece of pipe that rests on the transmission housing back here, or the rear end or rear axle housing, and then this right here lacks just a couple of inches of coming in contact with this large 7/8 bolt coming out the side of the torque tube. This large bolt here coming out of the torque tube, well, I was able to place this up here like this, and then take a porta par and set the porta par right in between these two, and we're able to control the push, so to speak, by just incrementally applying pressure to that porta par, and it just gently popped loose. Then we went about the business of shaking it apart. And you can see the benefit to having the wide outriggers and stuff there, because to go ahead and roll this forward after the separation, I just put the floor jack on this right here. Then we just gently roll forward after we jacked it up to where the outriggers was just barely skimming the ground, and we just rolled it forward about 2.5 feet completely out of our way. And I'll go ahead and crib up underneath here and remove the jack so that everything will be safe and secure there. Now obviously this is a good place to stop the video on splitting the tractor in half. We now have access to the seals that are leaking, of course, and so the next video is going to be pulling the seals out and trying to get replacement seals, and also the input shaft bearing, because there is a little bit of wobble in that input shaft. I'm assuming the bearing is going to be bad. But at any rate, now's a good time to end the splitting of the 1945 Farmall H to get access to those seals. And you know what? This is Tractor Man 44, and I am out here, guys.